Aurobindo, Savitri. Then suddenly there rose a sacred stir. Amid the lifeless silence of the void, in a solitude and an immensity, a sound came quivering like a loud footfall, heard in the listening spaces of the soul. A touch perturbed his fibers with delight. From Sri Aurobindo's Savitri, page 334.
Neck for the constant lightning of the spirit. Its body is woven by a divine sense, prolonged the nearness of soul's cloud with soul.
Words of our Divine Mother. Topic: the four liberations. Our Divine Mother says, this leads us quite naturally to the four liberations, which will be the concrete forms of this achievement. The liberation of the feelings will be at the same time the liberation from suffering in a total realization of the supramental oneness. The mental liberation or liberation from ignorance will establish in the being the mind of light or Gnostic consciousness, whose expression will have the creative power of the word. The vital liberation or the liberation from desire gives the individual will the power to identify itself perfectly and consciously with the divine will and brings constant peace and serenity as well as the power which results from them. Finally, crowning all the others comes the physical liberation or liberation from the law of material cause and effect. By a total self-mastery, one is no longer a slave of nature's laws, which make men act according to subconscious or semi-conscious impulses and maintain them in the rut of ordinary life. With this liberation, says our Divine Mother, with this liberation one can decide in full knowledge the path to be taken, choose the action to be accomplished, and free oneself from all blind determinism so that nothing is allowed to intervene in the course of one's life but the highest will, the truest knowledge, the supramental consciousness. From the Collective Works of Our Divine Mother, Volume 12, page 48. Words of our Lord Sri Aurobindo. Topic: Nirvana or higher evolution. Our Lord Sri Aurobindo says, if it is the sole intention of nature in the evolution of the spiritual man to awaken him to the supreme reality and release him from herself or from the ignorance in which she, as the power of the eternal, has masked herself by a departure into a higher status of being elsewhere, if this step in the evolution is a close and an exit, then in the essence her work has been already accomplished and there is nothing more to be done. The ways have been built, the capacity to follow them has been developed, the goal or the last height of creation is manifest. All that is left is for each soul to reach individually the right stage and turn of its development, enter into the spiritual ways and pass by its own chosen path out of this inferior existence. Our Lord Sri Aurobindo says, but we have supposed that there is a further intention, not only a revelation of the Spirit, but a radical and integral transformation of nature. There is a will in her to effectuate a true manifestation of the embodied life of the Spirit. to complete what she has begun by a passage from the ignorance to the knowledge, to throw off her mask and to reveal herself as a luminous consciousness force carrying in her the eternal existence and its universal delight of being. It then becomes obvious that there is something not yet accomplished. There becomes a clear view that much has to be done. There is a height still to be reached, a wideness still to be covered by the eye of vision, the wing of the will, the self affirmation of the spirit in the material universe. From the collective works of our Lord Sri Aurobindo, volume 19, page 889.
Not ceased in the unbounded heart. His heart lay somewhere conscious and alone, far down below him, like a lamp in night, in the center of its vast and fateful song, halfway between his free and fallen self, interceding with God's day and the mortal's night, accepting worship as its single law. To her it turns for whom it will to be.
How to proceed? 3 stages of progress. Our entire nature and its environment, all our personal and all our universal self, are full of habits and of influences that are opposed to a spiritual rebirth, are the words of our Lord in the book Synthesis of Yoga. For this, a Divine Mother gives an explanation. I have often told you, haven't I, that the first state of your being is a state of an almost total mixture with all things from outside, and that there is almost no individualization. There is a specialization which makes you a different being. Your mood, a kind of form, which is your physical being, is moved by all the common universal forces, vital, mental, which go through your form and put it in motion. And all that you wrested from this general semi-consciousness and have crystallized into a more or less independent being, conscious of itself and having its own qualities, all this is your individual being. And this individual being is full of all moments of obscurity, unconsciousness, and the limitations of ordinary life. And that's what you must gradually open to the divine influence and bring to the consciousness and understanding of things. Our Divine Mother says, in fact, the first victory is to create an individuality, and then later the second victory is to give this individuality to the divine, and the third victory is that the divine changes your individuality into a divine being. There are 3 stages. The first is to become an individual. The second is to consecrate the individual, that he may surrender entirely to the divine and be identified with him. And the third is that the divine takes possession of this individual and changes him into a being in his own image, that is, he too becomes the divine. Our Divine Mother says generally all the yoga stopped at the second, when one had succeeded in surrendering the individual and giving him without reserve to the divine. To be identified with him, one considered that his work was finished and that was all accomplished. But we begin there and we say, no, this is only a beginning. We want this divine with whom we are identified to enter our individuality and make it into a divine personality in a divine world. And this is what we call transformation. But the other precedes it, it must precede it. If that is not done, there is no possibility of doing the third. One cannot go from the first to the third, but one must pass through the second. Question, sweet mother, the third depends entirely on the divine whether he wills to take possession or not. For this, our divine mother says, in fact, everything depends entirely on the divine. It is only the consciousness you have of it which is different. So, in the third stage, obviously, one becomes conscious that it is the divine who does everything. So, depends entirely on the divine. When you say this, the part of your consciousness which is still convinced of its separation and its own existence is looking at the other and saying, "Oh, good, now I shall have no longer to do anything." But if it is no longer to exist, it becomes conscious that it is the divine, then it can't have this impression. It does the work, continues to do it, but with the true consciousness instead of having the distorted consciousness, says our Divine Mother. Next topic, how to individualize oneself. Your conscious soul and an intelligent will. Question, sweet mother, there are mistakes. One knows there are mistakes, but still it is as though one were pushed into making them. Then, for this, our Divine Mother says, pushed by what? This is exactly what happens. It is a lower nature, the instincts of the subconscious, which governs you and makes you do things that you should not do. And it is a choice between your will and accepting the submission. There is always a moment when one has to decide. It goes to the point where, as I said, there is even a moment when one can decide to be ill or not to be ill. But for the ordinary things, as for example, giving way before an impulse or refusing it, it is not a space, not even the space of a second. One has plenty of time before one certainly has several minutes, and it is a choice between weak submission and controlling will. If the will is clear, if it is based on the truth, it obeys truly the truth, it is clear, and it always has the power to refuse the wrong moment. It is an excuse that you give yourself when you say, I could not do it. It is not true. It is that truly that you have not wanted in the right way. For there is always a choice between saying yes and no, but one chooses to be weak and later one gives himself the excuse saying, it is not my fault. I was stronger. It was stronger than I. It is your fault if the thing was stronger than you, because you are not these impulses. You are a conscious soul and an intelligent will, and your duty is to see that what governs you and not the impulses below. These are the words of our Lord Aurobindo and our Divine Mother. नमस्तस्यै 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 नमो नमः या देवी सर्वभूतेषु छायारूपेण संस्थिता नमस्तस्यै 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 नमो नमः या देवी सर्वभूतेषु शक्तिरूपेण संस्थिता नमस्तस्यै 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 नमो नमः या